your story about your family and the different things that went on. Can you kind of start from the beginning and take us back to the 80s, the 90s, and just kind of walk us into what was going on around the property and what your family experienced?
Okay. Well, I believe you already talked to my sister, Lisa. I don't know, it was like episode 58. Well, I'm her older sister. The time that she was talking about was probably 88, 87, 88, in that area. But they were on the flats. I was already in college by then. And so I would hear, when we had our phone conversations, I would hear that there were weird things going on and there was something bothering the house. But I really didn't pay attention to it until in 88 I had come home for Thanksgiving. It was a really nice day. All of a sudden, like, all these pickups and Jeeps were flying past our house going down this ravine. We live on like a flat, and then you go down the hill, and then there's the creek that runs down there. And there was an old dirt road that would go down the hill, go across the creek, and then go up the bigger hills behind our house. So we had just gotten done eating our Thanksgiving dinner, and we saw these vehicles flying down the creek, down the road there. And one of them was a Jeep, and on its roll bar, it had this huge gun. I mean, it was big. And we just kind of all watched them go down the hill. And my mom made the comment, well, I hope they don't start shooting this way because they'll blow our propane tank up, And my dad was like, where are they going? What are they doing? Well, come to find out, I guess they had a sighting in the hills back there. Later that night, you could tell when he was around, or I don't know if it was a he or a she, but you could tell when Bigfoot was around because the coyotes would really start howling. They would start yelping. It was different from their normal routine in the evening. And then you could hear the howls, real long howls. And it was mixed in with the coyotes and their howling. There was also a smell that kind of drifted up from the creek area, and right then you knew that he was around.
What kind of a smell would you smell? Can you describe the smell?
It was like sewer and sulfur. You know how when you strike a match and that real bitter smell? It was like that mixed in with sewer, but smelled like sewer.
I gotcha.
And it was real thick. It wasn't like something wafting by, it just was just in the air. So it seemed as though when my dad was home, my dad wasn't home because his work kept him away. And so he would come back on weekends and during holidays. But when he was home, nothing would really happen. But when he wasn't home, that's when everything started or would act up. We had 2 dogs. Their names are Bootsy and Jordan. And they were really, really good dogs. When the coyotes would start howling and carrying on, our dogs would come back and they would sit on the porch. When Bigfoot would come up to the house, it was probably around maybe midnight, 1 o'clock. And it would start out with the coyotes howling, and then our dogs would just start, it's like, I call it a low growl. It was just real deep, real menacing. It wasn't a growl that they did all the time. And that would happen. And then you would hear them, and it was really scary because they would run up and they would hit the screen door, bam, 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 like they were trying to get in the house. But when we would open the door, or when I would open the door and try and get them into the house, they wouldn't come in. They would just stay on the porch. Maybe about an hour or two later, you would hear knocks up on the house, up like where the roof is. You would hear knocks, like someone's knocking, which was really weird, but we knew that he was around when that would start happening. I never saw him, but I did have an encounter when I was taking Christmas presents to my cousin's house. And we live about 4 miles north of the small town, and there's this creek that runs east to west. And then the highway, the main highway, cuts it in two. Well, my cousins lived about maybe a mile north of us, and they were a lot closer to the creek. Well, I was taking our Christmas presents up there, and this was probably, it was like the beginning, no, it was on Christmas. I'm sorry. And so I took the presents up there. My sister Lisa was with me, and we got up to their house, and there's this long driveway. It's probably about a half mile from the main road to get to their house. And on each side of this dirt road, there's these big, tall trees. And so it's kind of creepy going down this road anyway. But we went up to their house, and we were getting the presents out, and I sent my sister in with the smaller presents. And as I was coming in, there was somebody peeking around the corner of the house, and it was like grunting at me. And my cousins were always teasing me, and they were always trying to scare me and all, just being cousins. And so I thought, and my cousins are probably around 6'2", 6'3", and I thought they were standing on they had this chopping block. So I thought they were on top of that, standing on top of that. And you remember those old-time Army jackets with that fur around the hood?
Yeah.
It looked
absolutely.
like that. Like they were wearing one of those with the hood up. And it was dark, but you could tell that somebody was peeking around the corner. And it was grunting at me. And so I thought it was my cousins just messing around with me. So as I'm walking into the house, I'm like, oh, you're not scary. I'm not scared of you. And as I think back on it, had I not had the presents in my arms, I probably would have ran to the corner and hid it, And it's scary because I'm like, what would have happened if I did that? But anyway, so I'm walking in the house, you're not scary. I'm not scared of you. Knock it off. And I go into the house, and you go up these stairs, and they're all sitting in the kitchen. And my aunt, she says, who are you talking to? And I'm looking at them, and I'm like, oh, come on, you couldn't have got in here that fast. And she's like, what? I said, they were out there trying to scare me. And she said, no, they've been here this whole time. And I'm like, oh, my God. Well, someone was grunting at me at the side of the house. So they went and they got their rifles and they scramble outside, and they come back in and they tell me there's no one out there. And the way their house was, it's like a split-level house. Well, it is a split-level house. And so where the head was right at the window. So I'm thinking maybe it was around 10 feet at least, but it was peeking around looking at me. so that was my encounter, and I never seen it like its face or hair or anything like that. I just seen the figure peeking around.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a terrifying encounter. You wonder what it wanted. I wanted to go back for a moment to your folks' place. Now, your sister saw the creature, didn't she?
Yes.
Can you give us
She did.
a brief rundown on what she saw? I know she talked about it in episode 58, but can you give us just a cliff notes of what she saw?
Yeah, she was riding her bike along the road. Our road that led to the main road was just a dirt road. And so she was riding her bike along the road that was closest to the edge of the hill, or the edge of the, it's not exactly a cliff, but the slope down to below is pretty steep. So she was riding her bike along the road there with the two dogs, and she saw it standing there. She told me she couldn't tell if it was looking at her, or I think she said she was scared it was going to turn around and see her. And so she took off back to the house. But that was during the time when it was just crazy at my parents' house. I mean, it got to the point where the police came out, and I think maybe there was 4 or 5 units that were stationed at different places along the creek, because it was tearing fences up. Not too far from where we live is a Catholic church, and it's this big compound. And so I guess it was pulling up the manhole covers and throwing them at the buildings, throwing stuff at people's houses. And so it got to the point where the police had to station units along that creek to see if it was, people that were terrorizing in the community. I remember when they had done that one night, they actually saw, one of the cops had actually saw him. He was more in the southerly area, and he thought it was one of his co-workers or another cop passing him by his unit. But then when it passed and as it got further away from his car, he realized it wasn't a human. So he radioed ahead, and they ended up shooting flares in the area down below by the creek. And I guess they could see it running. It ran from the bottom of the hill where our house was across the field and into the creek. So it wasn't like it was just a couple people having experiences here and there. It was a big deal, and it was scary because it was almost every night that Bigfoot was coming in. And I don't know if it was just one or if it was a group of them, but the people that said they saw it, it was pretty big. It was huge.
Yeah, and it's interesting, as I talk to more law enforcement individuals, I had Chris on the show last week, and I asked him, when you get these phone calls that people are seeing these creatures out on the reservations, how do the police handle it? Is it kind of like, oh, give me a break, now we got to go out and deal with this? And he said, no, it's not really like that, When someone actually sees one of these things, it's taken pretty seriously. And it's interesting that he says that. I was just talking with a law enforcement official in Alpine, California. He called me late last night, and, him and I were talking, and they had a sighting up on Otay Mountain. I was up on Otay Mountain recently, and as him and I got to talking, what was interesting is he went back. Him and another patrol agent were driving in a car on the same road I was just on, and they had come across a creature. One of the guys freaked out. They go back to the station, and they make a pact not to talk about it. Well, the guy he's with starts talking about it. And what's interesting is the watch commander comes in, and goes, "What did you guys see?" And everyone's listening to the story at this point, so now he has to tell what happens. So he tells what happens, and the guy goes, the watch commander goes, "I'm going to print something up for you. You saw a Zuby." And he goes, "What the heck is a Zuby?" And that goes back to the Proctor Valley monster. It's a long story, but they called them Zubies back then.
Right.
And he printed it up and goes, "You guys saw a Zuby." And what's interesting about, law enforcement is I think it's taken more seriously than most people realize. They just don't come out, and the tribal police might be a little bit different, and the other thing I find interesting about tribal police, depending on the belief system of the tribe, is how they deal with it. I've talked to some tribal police to where if there's a Sasquatch call, they flip a coin on who's going to go out there because no one wants to go out there and deal with it because they believe the people. They just don't want to go out there and deal with it. Mm-hmm. And so that's cool that the tribal police came out and kind of set up shop around your parents' place with all that going on. That's pretty commendable. What do you think the creature wanted?
That I don't know because, like I was saying, we've always known there's things out there, and we don't play out once it starts getting dusk. We know we're supposed to come back in because something might get you. And I don't know if these are kind of like renegades or it's just one male that got mad. I don't know. But they're not, from what the unspoken word is, they're not supposed to come around our houses. Why? I don't know. And so when they do come around the houses, it is a big deal because they're looking for something, they're mad, or, like I said, they can be sick. They're not supposed to. Their usual behavior, they don't come around us. And I'm thinking because our siblings were young at the time, it probably hurt them.
Oh, I gotcha. Because of the younger kids around the property.
Yeah, and that's what I've been told as well. Little kids playing, laughing, that draws them to you.
Yeah, let me ask you about this. Let's back up for a moment because, and you're one of the first people I'll talk to about this. I find that a little disturbing, don't you?
Yeah, I do. And that's why I said I think it's a rogue or a renegade or maybe it's a younger one that just wants to see what's going on.
Yeah, and the Sasquatch is supposed to be intelligent. I come across a baby black bear. And I know it's time to go because Mama's not far away. I'm not going to stick around. I'm not going to play games. I'm out of there because I know Mama's not far away. And you brought up a really good point. I don't think a lot of people grasp in the sense that, when you're in a rural area and if you have coyotes or you have mountain lions coming up to your house, it's not a good situation. They're not coming up to befriend you, and maybe I'm putting words in your mouth, Laura, and I apologize if I am, but that's my feeling on these things. I feel like if they're coming up to your house, they're banging on your house, they're hanging around the property, it's not a good situation to be in. That's not the time to feed them. That's not the time to welcome them. That's not the time to. I think you're playing with fire. I mean, I really do.
Yep. And so when it gets to that point, that's when everybody, groups together. I remember one night, there was just me and Lisa and our two younger siblings home, and we heard the coyotes going off, and then we heard a big, someone was pounding on our door, and we're like, oh my God, because he or Bigfoot would occasionally do that. They would knock on our door, you would open it, and there's nobody there. And so I kind of thought that was the situation. But being the eldest, I was in charge of them. So I opened the door, and there's this truckload of guys with all their rifles out. And there must have been at least 10, 12 of them, all in this truck. There's probably, 8 or 9 in the back, and then 3 in the front. And they came and they asked us if we were okay. And I said, yeah, we're fine. And they said, well, we just saw one of them down at the school. The Catholic Church also runs a school. And we found its footprints, and this is a mean one because it only has 4 toes. I didn't even know at the time there was a difference,
Now that's interesting. Why did they think because of the 4 toes that was a mean one? Did they ever say, or what's your theory on it?
I think because there was so much damage being done in the community, and it wasn't like running up to the house and knocking on the door or the roof or anything like that. This was actually throwing and destroying things. And so I think that's what the connection that was made between the behavior that was going on and then the tracks that they found.
Well, and the point I was trying to make, I almost wonder if it was inbred.
That could be too. But I've never known our people to chase it. It was always, we were in a protective mode. And so it would, just like you would, a bear or a mountain lion, you would chase it so far, and then it was like, you stay over there and don't come over here.
Yeah, and that's interesting too. A lot of it really depends. Here's where I get lost on a lot of Native Americans. And I know when a lot of people see a guy like me with the shaved head, I'm white, they think it's just a white boy talking. My grandmother was full of, my grandmother was full Apache. And she, what's interesting is it really depends on the tribe you talk to on how they deal with these things. But what's interesting is, and here's one of the things that has always thrown me off, and I think you're one of the very first people that have picked up on it. I don't think too many people listening to the show, they'll pick apart different things that I say, but you're one of the few people that have actually picked up on this comment, is a lot of tribes will say it's a spiritual being, it's a guardian of the forest, it's our forest brothers, but in the same breath, if they're coming around, keep your women and children close by. And that just seems so odd to me. If it's the forest guardian, if it's our spiritual brother, if it's then why is there a need to keep your women and children close by? You know what I mean? Is that disrespectful? If It is, I apologize.
No, and that's one of the things that I talk to my non-native friends about. They always talk about, on the websites you have, what kind of spirit are you? Do you have your animal totem is a bear or an elk or whatever? Well, that is based on some truth to that. You do have like it's not actually a totem, but it's like a spirit animal. It's a guide. It tells you different things. But if, like, say, my helper or my guide is a bear, it doesn't mean I'm going to go out looking for bears because they're my friends.
Right.
They have their place and we have ours.
It's really, really interesting that you say that, because a lot of, and I've talked to a lot of Native American people, and they're kind of, and I really, really appreciate coming on, because they're hard to get to come on the air.
Yep.
Because a lot of times they don't, I've never beaten up anyone on the air. I'll never invite someone to the show and then beat them up on the show. It just won't happen. But I think that a lot of Native people fear that. And it's really interesting because it just goes back to what are these things? Through your experiences and through your family's experiences, let me ask you, what do you think these things are?
Well, I think they're animals. I think they're creatures just like a bear or a mountain lion. I think they're along that realm. But they're more intelligent than that, because they can follow you. They can, almost like they're playing with you. I used to take my son down below where the creek was, and there's a road that goes back along the creek, and it goes back to the school. And so I didn't want him riding his bike on the main road, so we would take the back road. And it never occurred to me, or I never thought much about what happened to us, but after listening to your episodes and people were talking about how it throws things at you, and that happened a lot, and in the creek you would hear these big, like someone threw a big rock into the creek. We have beavers in the creek, but it wasn't a beaver. It was huge. It was a huge, like, kerplunk in the creek. And my thing would be, geez, that's a big beaver, But my son he would go so far, and, if you didn't call him back, he would just keep going. But one evening when we were coming back, he wouldn't go very far from me. And he kept looking in the trees. He kept looking along the creek. And he was just kind of like walking his bike in front of me. And then shortly thereafter, you would just get that creepy, you got to run, that type of feeling. But we were always told, don't run. Whatever it is, don't run, because you run and they're going to come after you.
Yeah, and I've always said that's good advice, is don't run. I always tell people don't run. Despite what happens, do not run. Because the minute you run, you become prey.
Yep.
You go from potential predator to prey at that point. I'm always thrown off when I believe people who have these things around their property, but I'm always thrown off by the behavior. I'm always thrown off because the behavior seems very angry. When they're coming up to your house, they're banging on the house, they're screaming and yelling. That's not really friendly behavior. And I know in some tribes, like Chris was saying, they'll tell you to go ahead and feed them. But in my mind, I think that's bad advice. I mean, and maybe I'm wrong. I mean, I could be wrong. If you ask any of my ex-girlfriends, they'll tell you I'm 100% wrong all the time. But I don't feel like I am. I just feel like that's bad advice. I mean, I really do. I feel like if you feed them, that's giving them an opportunity to come around. That's feeding into the behavior of, hey, come around and I'll feed you.
Right. And I think that's where the westernized view is different from the native view, because we don't think we're feeding them. We are offering them. It's like a prayer. I don't want to say a gift, but it's something that we're offering them to stay away,
Like an olive branch. Like
right.
an olive branch.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So for us, it's not feeding them. It's like we're respecting you. We know you're around. Here you go. Now you have to leave. That type of thing.
Yeah, and I guess I can get that. I guess I understand that a little bit. I had a guy in Washington State that was around the Browns property that I've talked about a lot in the past, and they would come through. He had a fish shack, and he would dry his fish, he would hang his deer, he would cure his meat, and for the longest time, it was getting broke into, and everything was being taken out. and the shack was actually being destroyed in the process. And the grandmother told her grandson, hey, leave some fish out and they'll stop doing it. And they actually did stop. But it throws you off. In my mind, I think this is some form of primate. And I always say non-human primate because I think as humans we're at a different level than most wild animals. But in the same breath, I don't think these things are stupid.
Right.
In the sense like a deer or, most animals out there, these things really aren't stupid. They're pretty smart when it comes to a lot of things.
We have, my sister has friends from up in the Northwest, and one of the things that, one of the stories that was told to her absolutely turned my blood to ice. And that was, he went into a sweat lodge, and he was praying, and he had, when you do these things, you generally don't talk about them because it's private. It's almost like the equivalent would be sort of like going to confession. You don't tell people what you're confessing.
It's personal. It's spiritual. Yeah.
Right. And so he went into the sweat lodge. He put his rocks in, and he started singing his songs. And all of a sudden, the flap opened, and one crawled in with him and sat there with him until he finished singing, and then it left. I'm like, oh my God, how could you continue singing, sitting in there with this being,
Yeah.
But after I think about it, it's kind of like, you see a ghost and you kind of pretend it's not there,
Yeah, I guess I can relate to that. I was just talking to Rocky Elmore, who's a Border Patrol agent, and he was talking about Otay Mountain, and he shared all kinds of stuff I'm sure he doesn't want me to talk about, but one of the stories he talked about was he was in the vehicle, the Border Patrol vehicle, and they came across this man walking. He was like, okay, that's weird. This guy's out walking, and he was wearing like 1920s uniform, like military Air Force uniform. And he was like, that's kind of weird. And as they pull up on the guy, he's going to stop and ask, it's 2 a.m. He's going to stop and ask him, what are you doing out here? So they pull up on the guy, and the guy turns around, and he said it gave him the most evil smile he's ever seen before in his life. And he's looking at this thing, and it's smiling right back, just staring dead at him. And he said the face started glowing, and then the thing disappeared. And he didn't even bother waking up his partner. He was like, I didn't see it. I saw nothing. I saw nothing. I saw nothing. So, I mean, with those type of stories, I guess I can kind of get at why he'd keep, it might be more comforting to sit there and sing and hope that this thing just goes away.
And so that story kind of made me think that, to me, it was like, almost like it was lonesome. Because back in the day, you would have people going way out there and doing their personal, spiritual ceremonies. And for whatever reason, our belief is that when you're in that mode, you're in that, I guess, state of mind, it'll come and it'll talk to you, or it'll sit there. But it never crosses, this boundary.
Do you think, let me ask you, or go ahead, I'm sorry, Laura, I didn't mean to.
No, I was just going to say, so it makes me think that, they've been here for such a long time that maybe they're lonesome for back in the day when there wasn't that many people.
Do you think there's two separate things going on? And let me explain a little bit. Here's kind of my own personal theory on it. I think there is Sasquatch the animal that people are seeing, people are running into, people are, they see it. It's definitely flesh and blood. It's a wild animal. Now, it might be a non-human primate. I mean, we could go on and on to what we think it is, but at the end of the day, let's just call it a wild animal for sake of argument at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And then I almost kind of think there's something else going on out there that kind of muddies the water.
Mm-hmm.
But in the same breath, I think it's going on. You know, when I listen to some of these Border Patrol agents, I listen to some of these law enforcement agents, I listen to some of these special agents from the tribal police, I've talked to many, many tribal police officers. It kind of seems like there's two separate things going on, but they intermingle in the sense
Right.
that it muddies the waters. And so is it flesh and blood? Is it spiritual? Well, it kind of depends on who you talk to and what their experience was. In the same breath, I think everyone's telling the truth. You know, you see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's just like, and again, you know, you could be on, you know, isolated and doing your prayers, and a bear can come up and sit by you. Doesn't mean the bear's not there, but there's almost this this sense that something bigger is going on. And that always, it's not anything new to us. We're brought up like that. And so for us, it isn't muddy water. You know, it's just the way it is.
Well, and a good example of that, I'll give you a better example. Every black bear I have ever come across, Laura, has ran from me. Me and my brother have been out hunting. If they get a sense of you in Washington, every black bear we've come across in Washington State, if they get a sense you're in the area, they are gone. Mm-hmm. They want absolutely nothing to do with you. And then this hunter sent me this YouTube video, and him and a buddy are sitting up in a tree stand. This black bear comes up, sees him sitting in the tree. I don't know if you've seen this yet or not.
Yeah, that climbs up the tree.
Yeah, it crawls up the tree, and it just chills with them. It's just sitting there chilling with them. And he sent me a message saying, not every black bear will run from you. And so I think going back to Sasquatch, it really depends on your experience with them is going to be your attitude, just like anything else in life.
Yep.
I wanted to ask you about this. And I'm trying to think about how to ask this question. So if you asked me 2 years ago, I would have told you these dogman encounters are misidentifications, or it's a different type of Sasquatch. But they're not quote unquote canine. My view of that's changed a little bit. But I've talked to a lot of Border Patrol agents. I've talked to a lot of law enforcement. I've talked to a lot of different people that have come across these things. Has a tribe ever talked about that? Or have you ever experienced anything like that out there in South Dakota?
Yeah, not necessarily the dog man. You know, Chris had talked about the Wiwilas, and those are little people. You know, everyone here, for the most part, know they exist. We have stories about half animal, half human people, where the bottom half will be a deer and the top half will be a man or a woman. Mostly it's centered around deer up here. And it's the different tribes that you go around where they have a different animal, but the other half is man. I haven't heard anything about, you know, half coyote and half man or anything like that. But we do have stories about the deer people is what we call them.
What is the little people? Is that like a mini Sasquatch? And I mean that respectfully because I've actually heard of other tribes talking about little people, but they'll describe them like a mini version of Sasquatch running around.
Our little people are miniature human beings. They're little people. They're probably maybe 2 feet tall, if that. And they mainly hang around like springs, natural springs. Sometimes you see them out in the Badlands. And for us, they're just another people.
That's strange. Have you ever talked to anyone that's ever seen one?
Mm-hmm. And it's not, again, it's not something that you're going to chase. It's just like, I'm trying to think of an equivalent to that. But if you see it, it's not a good thing. Or if you see them, it's not a good thing. You know, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to die or, you know, something tragic. But it's not a good thing to actually see them. You're not meant to see them. So either you're doing something wrong or they're trying to forewarn you of something. Those types of sightings, just like when you see Bigfoot, you don't chase them. You don't announce it to everyone. It's just kind of like family members. Oh, I went out hunting, and along in those trees, I saw Bigfoot. So I turned around, you know. And it wasn't like, oh, I see Bigfoot, now I'm going to chase them, and you just don't do that. So it's the same thing with the little people. You know, you see something like that, you just turn around and go about your business. Whereas nowadays, you know, you have all these shows where you see something and they're going to go chase it. And it's just kind of comical because I'm like, one of these days it's not going to run. It's going to turn on you.
Yeah, and I tend to agree with you. I think it's foolish to push it too far, especially with these things. You know, Bob Garrett, it was interesting when I was in Texas, him and I had a log thrown at our heads, and I was like, hey, you know, we're armed to the teeth. Let's go in there and let's you know, I'm not going to put up with this. Let's go in there and find out what's going on. And Bob said, you know, Wes, these aren't your personal toys. He goes, you know what? That's a fight you're not going to win. And I knew he was right. Mm-hmm. I knew he was right. But, you know, it's interesting. The guys around your parents' property, these things have to be flesh and blood. You know, their first reaction is, let's get our guns and let's go chase this thing down. And I'm assuming they were going to, you know, light it up with all the guns that they had. Mm-hmm. I truly hope one day, and I'm going to sound like a real bastard saying this, I truly hope one day someone shoots one, brings it in, shows everyone that they do exist. It's kind of like one and done. You know what I mean? That sounds really heartless. I even hate saying it. I feel terrible saying it. But it's kind of the way I feel with these things. Because like your parents' situation, I do think that there's bad things that go on with these creatures. I do think people come up missing because of these creatures. I do think that these creatures... Do I think they're all godless killing machines? I don't. Do I think there's some bad apples in the group? I do. But it would be nice for it to be recognized by everyone, just so people are aware when they go out there, when they go hunting, when they go camping. Hey, you know, you might run into this thing just like you would a mountain lion, just like you would a bear, just like you would anything else. Be aware of your surroundings. Just because you're in a marked campground doesn't mean these things won't come in. Right.
And it depends, too, I think, where you set up your campgrounds. You know, we have, and people may not tell us why these certain areas are off limits, but you know if they tell you it's off limits, it's off limits. We don't go in there and, well, we're the humans and we're going to take over this area and too bad for you, you know, because we know that bad things can happen.
Yeah, and that's funny that you mentioned that. It's kind of like here in California, going up to Otay Mountain, every Native American I've talked to said, you know what, I probably wouldn't go up there if I were you. And I'd say, why? And depending on who you talk to, you get a different story. But at the end of the day, the warning is still there. It's probably not a good idea to go up there. And it's not because of illegals coming across the border. It's not because of bandits up there. They'll flat out tell you, there's things up there you probably just want to leave alone. It's probably best if you don't go up there. So, I mean, I agree with you. I think that warnings of certain areas, don't go into certain areas, should be heeded. I guess I'm guilty of not heeding the warnings, but what do I know,
Right. But, I think it's just your worldview of what your life experiences are. Natives always have this worldview. We're not the only ones. We're not the top of the food chain. We are a part of it.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the reason why, too, that not many natives talk about it is it's kind of like, that's our story. If we tell everyone what's going on, just like what happened at my parents' house, you're going to have all these people with their big guns searching around, being in places that they have no business being in.
Yeah.
There's other tribes that feel once a Bigfoot is captured, that is a sign of the world coming to an end.
Yeah,
so
and that's interesting.
It's kind of, for natives, it's just like, they're there, leave them alone. We don't need to know, we don't need a body, to say it's here. We know it's here just because we've seen it, we have stories about it, we've been warned about them. Just like, again, going back to the mountain lion, I've never, well, actually I have, but, people don't see a mountain lion, but they exist.
Right. Yeah, and you're right. You cross the mountain line, you might be playing with fire at that point because you might get into a fight you can't win.
Mhm. And we even had one come up to the house. So my brother went out with his rifle and tried to get it, because that's not good either. They'll get your dogs, they're your kids. It's not good.
Yeah, no. If they're coming up to the house, just like Sasquatch, just like anything else, it's lost its fear of you at that point, and that's not good.
Yep, exactly. So the only story that I remember, like I said, they've been around for a long time. We've known they've been around. And one of the stories that I remember was my dad telling me that back in the day when all the natives used to live, in real rural areas, and every so often you would come in to the agency and you would get your rations. And that consisted of, food, maybe some blankets. And so everyone would come in, and that was also the agency's way of doing a head count, But this certain, and it's right in between where my parents' house is and where my cousin's house is, there's these huge hills back there. And apparently they were up there, it was beginning of winter, and they were all camped up there. And they were coming into the town, and they were all sleeping, and they heard this really loud scream. It was a really loud yell. And they all decided, well, we got to go bed. It's time to go to bed. Let's go. And so the guy that was watching the fire, kind of watching the camp, saw, and it was moonlight, saw a big man. And from where he was sitting, which was on the log by the fire, it took up the full moon. And he had to, look all the way up to see him. So he sounded the alarm, screamed, told everyone to get up. And so the guys all jumped on their horses and took off after it and started shooting at it. And it came to this big ravine. And I've seen this ravine. I mean, it's huge. I really can't tell distances, but it was a pretty large ravine. And they said it must have shot it. They must have shot it because at the edge of the ravine, there was blood spots in the snow. And then, so they went down into the ravine and they lost it. So another party went around the ravine and they picked it up on that side. So they shot it and it did bleed and it took off, it jumped that ravine, no problem. And so they came back to camp and, guarded the camp until it was day, and then they left.
I really am with you on this. I think that they can bleed. I think they can be killed. I think they can be shot. Yeah, that's a fascinating story. That's a really fascinating story. Did they worry at all about shooting it?
Mm-mm. Again, if it's coming into your area, it doesn't belong there. So you need to get it out of there.
Hence the guys driving around with the, the huge gun mounted up on top of the Jeep, driving around your parents' place. They were probably doing the right thing, generally speaking, trying to get it to go away,
Well, this wasn't anybody from here. It was people off the reservation that had come here. And we can't figure out how they knew what was going on here. Because generally speaking, when those things happen, it stays within the confines of our area. So we couldn't figure out how, and they were like big, they looked like big game hunters, We had, and that was the other thing, we're thinking, one time, the next morning after we had this big to-do the night before, the next day a black helicopter came. And it was all black. I saw it, and it was really close to our level up on top. But it was down below by the creek. And it was just going back and forth, and then it would go back further to the west, and then it would slowly come back up like it was looking for something. And it was a black helicopter. I remember that now. Well, I don't know if these guys, these big game hunters, was associated with the helicopter or the helicopter told them. I don't know. And it's really, I found that that deathbed confession, that almost sounds like it happened up here.
Yeah, it did. It did happen up there. But what's interesting is, you hear about those types of stories, and they're starting to come more and more out. I think as people are starting to pass away or getting to that age of wanting to get it off their chest, those stories are starting to come out. A lot more and more stories are starting to come out. I always go back to Brenda Harris down at the Four Corners, and she'll flat out tell you that there's been a few occasions where the natives have shot these things, and people roll up in blacked out SUVs. The first thing they do is take everyone's phones, and they check everyone's phones for pictures, and then they threaten everyone. You're no longer going to get a check. You're no longer going to get this. We're going to ruin you with this. And then they start threatening everyone the moment something has been shot. And it's just, it makes you wonder why. Why is the government have such a hard-on for this? You know what I mean? It's like, why is there this mentality of, the black helicopter? You know how many times I've heard the black helicopter after someone has shot one of these things or has claimed they've shot one of these things, and all of a sudden these guys roll up and no one really knows who they are, no one really knows where they're from, and they just kind of put a kibosh on the whole thing.
Well, I think it's because for the general public to know that these things exist, that there is a body that you can touch, that you can see, no blurry videos or no blurry photos, it's going to affect a lot of things, and the general population, if something's threatening you or something has threatened you, you get rid of it. And I do not think that the government has the capability to get rid of them. Because if they did, I think they would have rounded them up and said, here, this is what we found, and we decimated them all. I don't think they can, however they're traveling underground through the trees, I don't think they can catch them without without attracting a lot of attention.
Yeah, and I tend to agree with you on that. It's and I try to stay away from the conspiracy stuff, but I talked to a detective one time here in Washington State, and he flat out told me that they'll erase tapes, 911 calls, anything to do with Sasquatch. They erase them now. They do away with them. And he knows someone in that's a dispatcher that flat out told him that they get calls like this from time to time, and then they just erase them. They just do away with them. So I tend to agree with you. I mean, if they wanted to wipe these things out, they would have done it by now. And I agree with you. I think that I think as more and more people come forward and say, hey, I saw this, I think the government kind of cringes a little bit when they hear that, because they don't want to hear legitimate encounters. They're okay with the crazy talk, but they're not okay with law enforcement coming forward. They're not okay with legitimate people coming forward and saying, hey, I saw this. Here's what I saw. And what's interesting is if you talk to someone in Washington State, if you talk to someone in Texas, if you talk to someone in Oklahoma, if you talk to someone in South Dakota, some of the details might be a little bit different, but generally speaking, it's the same thing everyone's seeing. I mean, if you're talking in general terms, some people might say, well, it looked more human in the face. Some people might say, well, it looked more like a chimpanzee. Some people might say, well, it looked more like an ape. Taking that aside, the description's the same. And none of these people know each other. So, I mean, and it's frustrating because it's kind of like I always say on the show, is everyone lying? Or are people actually seeing something? And if everyone's lying, that seems more crazy to me than, yeah, people are actually running into these things. People are actually seeing these things. I didn't mean to go off on a tangent on you.
No, but that's interesting, too, because, it's not, just the hillbillies in the hills or these rural farmers or anything like that. It's across the board, The doctors, the lawyers, it's just, and there are people that didn't grow up the same. So how are they going to make up the same thing? So I agree with you,
Right, yeah. How is everyone seeing the same thing? And you're right, it's kind of like with the show, you don't want to listen to a Native American? Okay, you don't want to listen to a hillbilly? How about someone in the military? Would you take their word for it? Okay, you won't take their word for it. How about someone in law enforcement? Will you take their word for it? I've had doctors on, I've had lawyers, and you're right, it's people from all walks of life that are describing the exact same thing they're running into. And what's interesting is the behaviors are the same. If you look at the behaviors of these creatures across the board, generally speaking, not a whole lot's different from Washington State to Oklahoma to Texas to South Dakota to Florida. Generally speaking, the behavior's kind of the same. Sometimes you get more of an aggressive creature, sometimes you don't. It's kind of unpredictable, and I just think people need to be aware these things are out there. People are seeing them. It's not delusional talk. It's not crazy talk. People are seeing these things, and people need to be aware when they go out to take heed that you can run into these things. And you may run into one that might just turn around and walk away, or you might not. I mean, there's not really a rule book on, well, if it does this, then you do that, or if you do this, then do that. It's very unpredictable.
And I'm wondering, and I think what happened to you and your brother is just, that's frightening. I really think you guys were lucky to leave there. But I'm wondering, were there stories by other tribes there that those are places you're not supposed to go?
Yeah, it was frightening. It was terrifying. It's the scariest I've ever been in my life. I mean, to be honest with you, it's the most terrified I've never been that scared in my life, ever. And most people don't know my background. I was a bouncer in Vegas. I've had guns pulled on me. I've looked down the barrel of guns. I've looked down knives. I've had knives pulled on me. I've been in rough situations, but this truly, truly scared me. But you're right, in that area, the local Native Americans, see, out here in Washington State, they'll tell you to stay away from these things and have nothing to do with them. They'll tell you, most tribes out here in Washington State will tell you they'll kill you and they'll eat you. And I talked to a tribal member out here, his son, Chief Aluska, his son out here, and he told me flat out that whole area over there, Yakult Mountain, which technically means Haunted Valley, but he would say, don't go into that area ever again. And the whole tribe out here, they avoid that area at all costs. They avoid Mount St. Helens at all costs. They want nothing to do with those areas because these creatures are in these areas. And he flat out told me, he said, "Hey, look, what happened to you and your brother? You guys shouldn't have been there in the first place. So it was kind of your fault."
Right.
you know.
Right.
Which wasn't great news for me because I was like, well, I didn't know. But he told me that those aren't areas that the tribal members go into, and they're told to avoid those areas at all costs.
Yeah, and that's kind of like, for instance, we have the Badlands here, and so there's certain things that you do, like maybe you park your vehicle on top of the highest hill that you can drive on. You just don't go wandering around in there. And I know people are told, I don't know what they're looking for, or they just want to see the scenery or what, but there's so many tourists that get lost in there. And it's like, well, you were told not to be wandering around in there, kind of along the same lines as that. So it's kind of, and it's, by all means, I'm not saying it was your fault. It's just there's something to be said for the spoken word, Listen to what you're being told,
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. And what's interesting, though, about the whole Yakult area, it's beautiful. The water, I mean, you literally the water's crystal clear. You can drink the water right there. You don't have to worry about it getting you sick. I mean, the water, and it tastes different from city water because when you drink it, it is crystal clear. It's real sweet, and it's just a beautiful, beautiful area. And if I was, 200 years ago, if I was in that tribe, I'd be like, hey, let's settle here, fellas. There's lots of food. The water's beautiful. This is perfect hunting grounds. There's beautiful cover. It doesn't get too cold. It doesn't get too hot. It's a perfect area, yet no one ever settled there. They actually went north. They went north from there. A lot of the tribes, they settled up north several miles from there, and they want nothing to do with that area. And so you're right. I think people need to heed that warning. The problem, though, is if you're not in the tribe, you don't hear the warning till afterwards about not going in that
Right,
area. I
right.
always I
And
always joke I always joke they should post signs up there.
natives don't go here, go away.
Yeah, go away. Yeah,
But yeah, it's just like I just go back to our worldview. We don't think we're dominant. We're just part of it. Whereas the Western worldview is, oh, well, we're going to come in, we own this, and if we don't, we're going to own it. And you can't tell us we're not going to go here because we're going to go here anyway.
yeah. Well, it's not just the Western view. I'm Apache. We invented scalping, and so there's kind of a. I'm just joking.
Say what?
No, yeah, you're right. You're right. There has to be. It's a respect thing. It's a respect thing that. Welcome to the show, everyone. Thanks for being here tonight. Got a great show planned for you. It feels good to be back in Washington State. I was down there in California for a few days. I want to thank all of the fans out there that sent me emails. I will be in touch with you. I apologize for not getting to you while I was down there. Just one thing after another. And I'm still pretty tired from running around. I feel like I was going 110 miles an hour the whole time I was down there. But it feels good to be back here in studio. It feels good to be back here on the radio with you all out there. If you've had an encounter, email me. My email address is wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. And if you get a chance, check out the website, sasquatchchronicles.com. Well, I want to welcome Jason to the show. Jason, thanks for coming on, man. I really appreciate it.
No problem, Wes.
And you're down there. This encounter actually took place in East Texas, one of my favorite areas, I'm sure, as you know from listening to the show. Absolutely one of my most favorite areas down there. But if you would kind of start from the beginning, walk us through how you got in the situation you got into, and then just walk us right into the encounter.
Okay. Well, basically, this is deep East Texas. It's almost to the Louisiana border. I grew up around Angelina and the Sabine National Forest there, which is just above the Big Thicket. Two big lakes there, Sam Rayburn Reservoir and Toledo Bend, and this is a heavily wooded area. And my dad was a land developer in the 70s and going into the 80s there, and he had a business partner, a surveyor, that would go in and break these lots up. They would build roads, and then he would sell them off, these acre plots. And so this business partner of my dad lived in the Sabine National Forest, and this is, I guess, if you want to know where it kind of is, there's towns like Center, Texas, that's in Panola County, San Augustine, Texas, Hemphill. It's right there close to the Louisiana border.
The Sabine River actually runs right through there, doesn't it?
Right. The Sabine River opens up into Toledo Bend Reservoir, which is a huge lake that runs, I don't know how many miles that lake runs, but it's a huge lake there that borders Texas and Louisiana. And they have highways, bridges that go over the lake into Louisiana. So, he had developed some campgrounds around there and things like that. But this surveyor lived down there, and, sometimes on a Saturday my dad would go and visit him, and he had his office. The surveyor had his office kind of beside his house. Deep in the woods, you had to go down a farm market road and break off down a dirt road. And sometimes my dad would ask me to come down there with him to visit with him because he had a kid that was about my age. And I was about 11 years old, and the surveyor's son was probably about 9 years old. He was actually a couple of years younger than me. But he was, my dad would take me down there and we would play I would play with the surveyor's son, and we would hang out in his backyard, and beyond his backyard was just, woods, just pine trees and deep East Texas woods. And we would play out there. This one particular time, the incident, we were playing, and he looked up at me and said, Chewbacca Man lives down that trail down there. And I said, Chewbacca Man? He says, yes, a hairy man down there lives down that trail. And I said, all right. He says, you want to see him? And I said, yeah. And I was a couple of years older than him, and I don't know if he was playing make-believe. I don't know what we were doing, but, I said, yeah, show me Chewbacca Man. And so we headed down this little trail that was kind of in his backyard, but it led deep in the woods, and I followed him down there, and we went a pretty good ways. I was getting surprised we were getting far away from the house. It was late in the afternoon, so the sun was getting ready to set, but we went down this little thin trail, and we got to this deadfall. And, a tree and some limbs and brush had fallen over. I don't know if it had been bush hogged over, but it was just a big fall that kind of blocked that trail. And I looked around, and he said, this is it. This is where he is. And he said, I'll call him. And so he said, I'll call him up. Ooh. He gave this, this whooping sound, and we didn't hear anything, and he did it again. And I started hearing cracking and footfalls and walking a distance away, but headed towards us, towards this deadfall, behind this deadfall. And it kept coming, and all of a sudden I heard, real heavy breathing, just, and I thought it sounded like a horse. And so I thought he had called up a horse. So I kind of got, relieved a little bit, and I was like, he's just called up some kind of horse. And he kept calling him. And about that time I heard a word. It was a sound. It was, I don't know how to describe it, but I remembered it went, oh, just like a deep word. And it startled me. It got my attention real quick, and it got serious real quick. And I knew there was something other than a horse behind that deadfall. And he kept calling it, real sweet, like a kid would. He would go, come on, come on, and it would move, and limbs started to kind of crack and move behind that deadfall. And my eyes widened, and I took a few steps back, and I was like, what in the world? I said to TJ, I said to him, I said, what is it? What is that? And then this sound, it went, just a huge percussive sound came from behind that deadfall, and it punched me in the stomach. It totally floored me, and my stomach dropped, and I froze. Like real fear just freezes you down. And Tommy was unafraid. TJ was unafraid. He said, come on, come on. And he goes, Chewbacca, and he kind of sings to it. And it was creeping me out, and this thing started having a fit. It pulled limbs from that deadfall. I could see them slide out away, and they were slamming on the ground, and this thing was, grunting and slamming the limbs, breaking limbs, and I just kind of came out of my stupor, and I looked at Tommy. He turned around slowly, and he said, "He doesn't like you. He doesn't like you here." And I turned on a dime and took off running. And Tommy yells, "Wait!" And I said, "No, come on, let's go, run." And I took off running. I ran down that trail, and this thing gave chase about a few yards away at first, and then it kind of went deeper away. It circled around, and I was running as fast as I could. I didn't care about TJ. I didn't care. I was just running. Limbs were slapping me in the face. I was trying to get back to that house, and this thing rounded around, and I looked to the side, over my shoulder at times, or to the side of the woods where I could hear it running with me, and I could see a big black figure. It wasn't it wasn't a horse. It wasn't a cow. It was a tall, slender, big black figure. I could see the stride of its legs running at times in and out of that brush, and it circled around, and it was beating me. It was beating me back to the trail. It was getting ahead of me, and I started to panic because I thought it's going to cut me off on that trail. And I screamed, "Daddy, Daddy!" And but at that second, the brush just came to a halt. This thing just stopped as soon as I started calling for my dad. I ran into that backyard. I ran up to that office where they were talking, and I grabbed my dad, and he said, "What's wrong, son?" And I explained it to him. I was telling him something was chasing me. TJ comes running up behind me. He doesn't say a word. He just kind of just is unaffected. And my dad said, "Well, I don't know what that was. You're okay now. You're all right." And the surveyor said, "Well, we've got a neighbor that, lives down the way, and sometimes their goats get out, and I bet an old goat chased you out of that trail, and this and that." And my dad said, "Go wait in the car. We're about to go." I go and get in the car, and I lock the doors, and I'm panicked, and I'm scared, and Tommy, TJ, I called him, comes walking around, and I rolled down the window, and I said, "What was that? What was it?" And he says, "I told you Chewbacca Man was back there." And I said, "What was it, though?" And he said, "It's the boogeyman. It's Chewbacca Man." And my dad got in the car. I rolled up the window. I saw Tommy walk to the back of the house. As we drove home, I told my dad all about it. I told him what I saw, that it wasn't a goat that chased me out of there. And he yeah, okay, you're all right. Well, I don't know what it is, but you're okay now. And we drove away, and one of the things, what's so crazy about this is I remember at the deadfall there was a lot of snack packages. There were Cracker Jack boxes opened. There were Little Debbie snack cakes opened. It's like this kid had been going down there and feeding this thing, and it creeped me out. And it is a story in my childhood that I've kept, and I don't tell anybody. I told my dad, and I told my best friend, who still lives in East Texas, and I'll get to that. But it's just a story that has been in my childhood that has always scared me. I at the time I didn't really think Bigfoot. That's Bigfoot, but I'm an Eagle Scout. I was in scouting a couple of years after this thing happened to me, we got to go, our scout troop got to go camp out in the Big Thicket. And there is the Alabama Coshada Indian Reservation that is in the Big Thicket there. It's near Woodville, Texas. And somehow they arranged for us to camp out there. And we did. And we were around the campfire and at night. And all of a sudden, the chief or a councilman or somebody came in with two braves, and they were part of the reservation. They were all dressed up. They had their shirts off. They had paint on them, and it was real neat for us to see these guys come in, these Indians, and they sat down at our campfire, and the chief started talking and telling us stories, and he was very good. He he would throw something in the fire, and the sparks would light up, and the forest seemed to accent his stories. He was just very good, and we were all the scouts. We were just glued to him, listening to him, and he began to tell this story of the hairy man of the woods. It wasn't a story of this, nice, thing. It was the wild man of the woods that we battled for years, and who would take our children and would kill you and drag you away. And it was a horrible, it was a horror story of and he described a Bigfoot creature. And, he said the words Bigfoot of today, and then it kind of, when he told that story, it kind of hit a nerve. I'm like, oh my gosh, that thing, the Chewbacca man, this thing that, was out there, immediately it clicked, and I'm like, it was a Bigfoot. It was something out there. And from then on, I was kind of, anything about Bigfoot, my ears would go up, and any show I was interested in. And then I get a call a couple of weekends ago from the friend that I told this story to. And like I said, I told it to my dad, I've told it to my wife, and I told it to my best friend growing up. And he is a deputy sheriff in a county in East Texas right now. And he's on the night patrol. And he calls me and he says, I have got to tell you something that happened to me, and I'm busting. I've got to tell someone. And you told me this story of this Chewbacca man when we were kids, and this thing that I saw this weekend, I'm telling you, this is it. And he proceeded to tell me a story. So he was on patrol, and there's a stretch of road, an old farm market road that is near the Angelina Forest, and it is a long straight road. And he said people have called in complaining about kids going out there racing, and they would race up and down this straight long road. It was not near any residential areas. Deep out in the forest. They called in and said, hey, they're racing on the wrong side of the road. They're going to kill somebody. And there were a lot of complaints. So he made that part of his patrol, and he had been going out there on Friday and Saturday nights to patrol that area and try to catch these kids racing and get them off the roads. So he said there's a lot of, places on that stretch of road where he could back into, and there's one old dirt road in particular that he had backed into a couple of times. And this particular night, it was actually a few Friday nights ago, and he backed in. He shut everything down. All the lights went down, and he waited. And he was setting up a speed trap, waiting for these kids to come through. And he said he waited there about 15, 20 minutes, and he said the cruiser was running. He has a Tahoe, is what he's assigned to, and he said the cruiser was running, but he had shut all the lights down and shut his laptop down and was just there in the dark. And he said, I'm ashamed to say that I drifted off to sleep. I started dozing off. He says there was a pop on the radio, and he woke up and had to shake himself awake and pulled up and got him a drink of water. He said when he turned to throw the water back in the seat, he looked over, and in his passenger window was a face just staring in the window. And he jumped back. He said, man, I pushed myself all the way to the daggum door, and I looked. He said, man, I was looking at something I have never seen. He said, I actually screamed out, and its breath was starting to fog the window, and he saw a massive face of high cheekbones, dark face. He said its eyes were inset deep. It looked like it was two black marbles in his eye sockets. And his nose was flattened. He said as soon as he turned and looked at it, it stood up and its face pulled away, and it gave him like a grimace. It gave him just a look. And he said, he goes, man, I've never, ever been so scared in my life. He said, I turned and I hit every light on that cruiser. I threw my cherries on. He said, I threw the spotlight on. I hit the brake light in the back, and he said, that's when I saw it walk on the back side of the cruiser to the back. And he hit the brake lights, and the red lights lit up in the back. In his rearview mirror, he saw its back light up. You could see the inset of his spinal cord and the layover of the hair. He thought, in his opinion, it was 7 foot tall. He turned around and looked back and saw it walk out of the reach of the lights. He said it wasn't like a big, fat, giant thing. He said it was a big 7 foot tall, kind of stooped. He said it kind of had a stoop to it. It stooped over, wide shoulders and muscular, but not just huge, just kind of lanky is what he said. And he goes, it just calmly walked away from those lights. And he said just then he put it into drive and sped out of there in fear. He said, I could not bring myself to get my sidearm, step out of the vehicle, and call on this thing. He said, I could not do it. I was that struck by fear. And he sped out of the dirt road, got on the main road, turned around, threw up all of his lights, and headed back down the dirt road to see if he could get it in his high beams. He drove down. He said it was gone. Just like that, it just disappeared like a ghost. He went down about a half a mile till he just said, man, I'm getting out of here. He turned around. He said the whole time he had his cherries on. He had his lights on, lighting up the woods. He spotlighted. He didn't see anything, and he turned around and left out of there. And when he called me, he was, freaked out like I'd never heard him. And he says, man, he goes, unless it was a freak out there in a ghillie suit or some hunter coon hunting out there, it was a Bigfoot. It was a Bigfoot. And he says, I cannot believe this is Texas. I cannot believe, what I saw. He says a daggum hunter would not be messing with a police cruiser at 11 o'clock at night. Who could get shot.
They're out there. They're definitely out there in that area. Let me ask you, how did he react when you originally told him your encounter story?
All those years ago, I don't know. He says, yeah, whatever. There's not a Bigfoot. That's not real. That type of thing. And then I go, yeah, I know, because you don't want to get made fun of. So, but and with Bigfoot, I've always been since I've had that weird thing in my past. Like I said, I've always been like, listening for it. I've always been an enthusiast. I'm not a Bigfooter. I'm not a guy that goes out looking for this. This kind of just, this story, him calling me, was a big surprise. And he was just floored. He could not believe what he saw. And he says, you don't tell anybody, none of our friends. I'm telling you this because you're my friend. And he's in law enforcement. He's not gonna talk about it to anybody but me. And
yeah, those guys, they have to be careful on who they tell
sure.
What to, especially being in law enforcement.
Yeah.
So I get that.
And, even at work, if I ever say, oh, did you see that Bigfoot show? And, I'm kind of like trying to find somebody who would, talk about it with me because I'm so interested. Everybody blows it off and laughs it off. And so I just shut up, And, but there is something, and there's a lot of stories that I've heard in East Texas. There's areas of East Texas that I don't hear mentioned much, but I have heard things come out of. Like there's areas, the Boykin Springs area. This is near Zavala, Texas. It's close in between Lufkin. It's also on the Sam Rayburn Reservoir. I've heard of things happening there. I have another story of a scoutmaster telling me it wasn't my troop, but he told us that this was at Double Lake. It's a lake called Double Lake. It's down on the Lone Star Trail, a little closer to Houston, Sam Houston National Forest, but kind of more east. He had taken a troop in there, and they had left the campsite one morning and was walking away, and he got a little ways away and realized he had left a knife that had meant a lot to him, and he was looking in his pack for it. He couldn't find it, and he says, I'm going to run back, and I'm going to go find my knife. So he left the troop and ran back to the campsite. He said, as he approached it, as he rounded the bend and was seeing where they had camped, there was something crouched down just beyond the campsite that was startled, jumped up, and ran away on 2 feet. He said it was covered black hair. He said he stopped and was startled. He wouldn't approach the campsite. He didn't know what it was. And he finally eased up there and got his knife and left. And he says, I've never been able to explain that. It was a tall, dark figure that jumped and ran away so fast. And he said it just spooked me. And I know that's, there's not a lot of detail there, but there's these whispers and stories in East Texas. And it makes me think it makes me think that something, like this creature, or a type of creature like that is in the woods there.
It's definitely out there. I mean, I think that, if you want my honest opinion, I think that whole East Texas area is infested with them. And the reason why I say that is just being actually out in that area and hearing the sounds that I heard and hearing finding footprints. And It's different than it is like in Washington State. Washington State's kind of hit and miss running into these things. But I kind of think that East Texas area, I think if you know where to go, I think you'll have an encounter. And I kind of cringe when I hear the Boy Scouts going out. I don't know if you heard the show. I was in East Texas, and we had vocalizations all night long. And as we were leaving, there was a Boy Scout troop coming in, and I thought, I don't know if I should say something to these guys, or I wanted to ask you about the encounter that you had with TJ. Have you ever spoken to TJ since then, or spoken to his dad since then?
No, I do have a follow-up to that. And one night after dinner, I heard my mom and dad talking, and he had said that he had not seen this surveyor. I'll say he's Mr. W, and he said, I have not seen him in a while, and I've called him, and I'm going to go out and see him because I haven't talked to him in a long time. He said, I've got some opportunities that I want to talk to him about. And it was like a week later, I guess I heard, them talking again, and he says, Mr. W has moved. He's gone, to my mom. And he said, it's so strange. He goes, I got a lot of business for him, and he had a good surveying business here. And he said, we have done a lot of lots together and a lot of projects together. And he didn't say goodbye to me. He didn't call and say, hey, I'm moving. And he said it was just a real quick move. And he had talked to a neighbor of his, and he says, he goes, they moved away real quick. I think he said that his wife and the surveyor's wife had talked and said, well, we're moving, we're going back to Alabama is what I think he said. But they just abruptly moved not long after that. And, I'm not going to tie in anything of what that could be, but they moved without saying a word. And I don't even know, I haven't had any contact with TJ. I mean, he would be a grown man now. And I don't know, but the weird thing about that's always kind of freaked me out is that if really this kid was going down there in his woods and discovered something or saw something and was bringing food to it, that's scary. I mean, that is a real creepy thing, and no telling what could have happened to that kid.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. I don't know if you heard Friday's show or not, up on SasquatchChronicles.com, but I talked to Laura, and she's a tribal member out in South Dakota, and she said, hey, these things are lured in with kids. They'll come in with kids, and it's not a good thing when they actually come in. Her and I were talking off the air, and I told her about the baby crying. The audio I played seemed to draw it in, and she goes, what's even better than that? She goes, try playing a bunch of kids playing. She'll see if you can find that on YouTube.
Yeah.
Just a bunch of kids playing. And she goes, these things will come in to check them out. And you're right. That kid going down there and feeding that thing, that's crazy. That's completely crazy.
Yeah, that's all I could think that, all these wrappers and snacks and things. And if he was going down there and calling it up like he did, this is something, when I went with him, it's something that he had done several times before. And he had even given it a name, Chewbacca Man. And, and when I was 11, that would have been about 82, 83. And, I guess what he thought, what a kid would think, hey, that looks like Chewbacca. It's creepy. It's really strange. And I guess nothing ever happened to him, but they did move away abruptly. And that surveyor had a really good business there, a lot of land developing at that time in the 80s down in that area. And for him to move away abruptly, I don't know, like I say, I'm not going to tie that in with it, but it is strange.
And these things can be very unpredictable, just like it was with you when you were there, like it was pissed. It was shaking the brush, it was shaking the trees, it was pissed. That kid must have some balls of steel to just kind of look over at you and go, well, it doesn't like you. That kid must have seen it a few times. He had to have.
Yeah. It's like it had a rapport with him. It had a relationship with him. And it freaked me out so bad. My dad had asked me again if I'd want to go back down. I was like, no, I'm not going. And I don't know if it was his innocence. I mean, he was a real country kid. I was a country kid, but I did live in a town, and this kid lived, in the woods, and I liked playing with him. We would play outdoors and play with knives and shoot BB guns, and we had a good time. I remember the times that I played with him. It was just this one last time that I mean, it was so strange. And I've told my wife, and she says, "Oh well, I guess you saw something." But when I kind of started thinking about it as I got older, and it's just something that's a strange thing from my past, I was thinking Bigfoot. I was thinking there, no animal is going to say things, or, I want to say it was speaking. I want to say that, I remember, it was like a deep, I can't even do it. I mean, it's so deep and bass coming from behind that thing that it startled you into life real quick. And it was not an animal. It was like that, it wasn't a known. I couldn't tell you what it was. And when it really sounded off, that weird sound or word, it wasn't a howl or a grunt, or it was just a scary, percussive, deep word or something. And I tell you, that's not a bull. There's no bears in East Texas that I know of. I mean, there are mountain lions, but the mountain lions not going to, these small cougars that are down in there, that they're not going to make a sound like that. Not something that's so deep and heavy like that. And that's what I'll never forget. You could feel the mass behind there. You could feel the deep heaviness of the thing back there. And, it gives me the creeps even now.
That really is one of the things that creeps me out the most about this subject, is your impression is actually pretty good. I've heard that more times than I care to hear, but where they'll vocalize like that. And what's even more creepy is when they start mimicking you, they start mimicking, family members. That's when it gets really, really creepy. And that is the part that really bothers, it bothers me. I don't know if it bothers anyone else, but it's a little bit too much like us. You know what I mean? It's a little bit too much, like you said, it formed a word, or it sounded like a word. And I'm sure that was your impression at the time. I've heard that before. I've heard that from a lot of people, and your impression that you did of the creature, that's pretty close to what I've heard in the past. And you're right, if a cougar's going to come in like that, you guys wouldn't have, one or both of you wouldn't have made it out. It would have gotten you guys. And that's interesting about this thing. When you took off running and it was chasing you, I wanted to ask, as you were looking over, watching this thing go through the brush, was it on 2 legs or was it on 4, or could you tell?
I saw a leg separation. Like I said, I saw like a stride at times. And I'm saying this as an 11-year-old. And I looked over and I could see a black swoosh. It was fast. And I could see a stride, like a separation of legs. And I never saw its face. I never saw its face that I can remember. It was just this thing chasing me, and I'm a kid, and I was crying. I cried for my dad. When I finally thought I couldn't get out of it, I yelled for my daddy. And that's when it finally stopped. And it stopped instantly. It stopped on a dime. And the brush and the whole rush of this thing coming in just stopped when I screamed for my dad.
And that part's fascinating, too. That kind of got it to stop chasing you at that point. How much further did you have until you got to the house?
Oh, just just a few yards, I guess. Now his yard was pretty deep, and this where the woods started, I don't know. I had about maybe 20, 30 more feet to go on the trail when it stopped. And when I broke through the trail and out in the open yard, I mean, I was running. I was hauling butt, man. I ran straight to my daddy's side, just like a kid would. And TJ just ran up out of the woods. He was out of breath too. We were both running, but he didn't say anything. He doesn't. It's almost like he was not going to mention it. And it was weird. It was a weird thing. And I didn't mind playing with that kid before, but after that, I didn't even want to be around him. He kind of creeped me out after that.
I don't blame you. I don't blame you at all.
I would never go back there. And growing up there, I drove down in that area before. I couldn't even tell you where he lived. As a kid driving with your dad, you don't know where they take you, down one road and another. I couldn't tell you where it was. I know it was I do. I know kind of where it is. That area of East Texas, around those lakes, is beautiful. It's tall pines. It doesn't look like the rest of Texas. You've got North Texas, which is, where I live now, which is, small trees and shrubs and mesquite. But the land changes as you go down I-20, which is headed into East Texas and Louisiana. Past when you get to Tyler, Texas, it's tall pine trees, hills, very pretty. But there are, and being in the scout troop and hiking, there are a lot of areas that are just wooded, and there's a lot of bottoms and creeks and areas that, and East Texas, the woods at night out there, I mean, there's no light pollution or anything. It is pitch black dark. If you ever stepped out into an East Texas woods at night and got lost, you'd never hear from me again. I mean, it is a secluded place down in some of those pockets of East Texas, and it's a spooky place. And I think there would be enough, hiding and enough places to be secluded and tons of food.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. That whole area, there's tons of food, tons of cover. Some of those areas remind me of Washington State because the brush was so thick when we were out there and we were going around. I would love to talk with the law enforcement friend. The description he gave you really is dead on with the description that people get. And I've never talked to someone who had an encounter like that. I've read many online, but I've never talked to someone that was falling asleep in their car, looked over, and then saw the creature looking in on them. I've read many online, but I've never talked to someone. I would love to talk to someone like that. And, your friend, law enforcement runs into these things more than you would imagine, especially being out there in East Texas. I bet he doesn't go out there and park anymore on that road.
No, I doubt it. No, I remember him mentioning, he goes, hey, I have to back into, to places all the time. He says, I have no fear at all. He goes, but I'm going to have this in the back of my mind from now on. But I was going to talk to him, and if I go see him, I don't get to see him that much. We talk on the phone at least once a month. This call was a call in the evening and just just the next day after that, and just was really pouring his heart out on it, and just surprised. I mean, extremely surprised and excited and creeped out. And he went on and on about, I can't believe it. I can't believe it. He goes, but I can't explain it. And he's trained on how to observe things. And he said, I can't put anything else in that slot. that it would be. He goes, but I don't know. I'm just saying what I saw, and it didn't seem to be scared and run off. It just kind of looked in the window and calmly walked around the cruiser and walked away.
If I'm ever down there in East Texas again, and I'm sure I will be in the near future, you should come out with, if I go out with Bob Garrett, Tim Sermons, and Mo and all those guys down there, you get kind of I don't want to say false sense of security, but those guys are so calm and cool when they go out there under intense situations. It's kind of nice to go out with them because, and I'm leery of these things. I think that they can turn on you on a dime, and I think they're very unpredictable. But going out with those guys is pretty cool because they can take you to a lot of areas. I've always said I'd love to take a skeptic. I know you're not a skeptic, and your law enforcement friend isn't. But I would love to take a skeptic or someone from like the Houston Chronicle and just say, hey, come out, hang out with us for a couple days. And I guarantee your theory, your thought about what's out there and what's not will change overnight. I guarantee it.
Wow. No, I
can't promise you'll see. Yeah, I can't promise you'll see anything, but you'll hear enough. You'll hear enough to make you stop and wonder about a lot of things.
Yeah. Well, if they're nocturnal and if they, I've had lots of thoughts of them of what they are, what they could be, how many are there. If it's a small population, if they're inbred, if they're, you have all these thoughts, and I think the mystery of it is the biggest appeal, but there has to be something. So many people see things, and I'm not saying that thing that chased me was a Bigfoot, but I, just like my friend, I can't put anything else in that slot that would be anything else. It was so strange and unexplainable. But I would love to go out. Like I say, I'm not a Bigfooter, and I live in the city now, and I work but I'm from East Texas. I know all these places, and there's something up around those lakes. I want to see. I can't wait for something to happen in real evidence. I want to believe it. So it's a cool subject.
Yeah, and I think you probably were chased by a Sasquatch. Like you said, what else can you plug into that type of situation? And, these things, I really believe, depending on the area that you're in, the numbers change on how many are out there. There's a lot of different things that go into that. There's a lot of things that come into that calculation, as far as how many are out there. It's kind of like I was out there in Southern California, and when I very first went out there, I thought, no way is there any Sasquatch out here. There's no way. There's not enough cover for them. But it's very deceiving. When you pull off of the road, you start to realize really quick, not only is there enough cover, there's enough food, there's enough water, there's the environment's set for these things. And, there's mountain lion everywhere, there's deer out there. What's interesting is, going back to your law enforcement friend, the Border Patrol out in that area that I was out around the Otay Lakes, Otay Mountain, they would run into this devil dog thing, which is a little different than Sasquatch, but they would describe it. They'd call it a devil dog, and they would run into it. A lot of different agents reported it. I had a law enforcement official contact me while I was down there in San Diego, and he said, hey, look, I got to tell you what happened to me. I don't know if I want to come on the air, but here's kind of what happened to us. And he told me the whole story. They were out on kind of near Otay Mountain, and they were going down one of these old dirt roads, and this thing was walking down the road. And as they pulled up on it, they realized it wasn't a person. And the guy hit the gas, almost crashed the cruiser, races back to the, to the station. And they make a pact, basically, let's not tell anyone. He's telling his partner, I don't want to bring this up. This is crazy. Everyone's going to think were crazy. And in law enforcement, you got to be careful on who you tell those things to. But they go back to the station. His partner starts telling everyone what happened. He steps away to the bathroom. He comes out, and his partner spilled the beans to everyone on what they saw. And the interesting part about that encounter story with law enforcement is the watch commander said, sit down, guys. So what happened? What did you guys see? So they explained to him what they saw and how big it was, and it was all hairy. It was walking upright like a person, but it wasn't a person. You know, was it someone in a ghillie suit? No. This is 2:00 in the morning, and these guys are saying that it was some sort of creature. They don't know what it was. And what's interesting is the watch commander goes, hang on a second, I want to print something up, walks over to the printer, and he printed out, I don't know if you've ever heard of the Proctor Valley Monster. They call them Zoobies, which is slang term for Sasquatch. But this, if you get a chance, check out the Proctor Valley Monster online. It's all over online. And he says, this is what you guys probably saw. And that was kind of the end of it. I mean, there was really no jokes. There was really no, so I mean, it's just interesting, especially when a law enforcement official has an encounter and how it's received. I can understand your friend not really wanting to tell anyone.
Yeah, and there's a ridicule. There's something as simple as getting passed up for a promotion but I'm sure there's a lot of things that those guys see that never come to light because you just can't, it's just not perceived as something real right now because of science, not really looking into it. I guess you have some people, I guess the cryptozoologists are looking for it, but, it's not taken seriously. And there's a lot of theories, as you know. But, you just can't really put yourself out there.
Yeah, and I truly feel bad for people who have encounters and they have no one to tell. They have no one to get it off their chest. Because you feel kind of a relief when you get it off your chest. It's kind of like I posted on the blog the other day about the lady that saw Sasquatch carrying a baby, and she described the baby looking like Chewbacca. And she called 911 to tell them about it. If you get a chance, check it out. It's on the website. But she said the baby looked like Chewbacca. She said it was like the ugliest thing she ever saw. But what's interesting is she called 911 to get it off her chest, to tell someone. Wow. And that makes me feel bad because, she probably saw something. She had no one to tell, and it's just been eating at her. Yeah, I don't think that was a proper use of 911, but, she wanted to get off her chest. And so, I think people need some sort of outlet when they see something like this to get it off their chest. So, and I can't thank you enough for coming on, Jason, and sharing it. It's a terrifying story. I mean, the Chewbacca man. It's terrifying.
It's terrifying. And for weeks after that, I was, wanting to go hop in my mom and dad's bed, and sleep with them again, even though I was 11. I remember being scared, but, it eventually kind of went away and went back to the corner of my mind. But like I said, it wasn't until a few years later when we were camping out and that old Indian chief was telling those stories and I, but it's got to be something, and it's interesting, and I really like the subject, and to think there's something that's out there in the woods tonight, deep in East Texas. It's scary, and it's fun to think of it, but it's serious too, because there's something to all these people seeing it, and it's not like, hey, there's this green monster. It's throughout history you've heard it's always this thing, this big hairy this big hairy Bigfoot thing. It's not a green thing. It's not everybody keeps seeing the same thing. So it's got to be something there.
Yeah,
And,
everyone is seeing the same thing. And what's interesting is if you go back over, old newspaper articles, if you go back and you listen to what a lot of the Native Americans say, you can take an old newspaper article from someone who had a sighting from 1920 and compare it to what someone says in 2015, and they're saying the same thing. It's an encounter that could have happened today. There's no difference in what they said back then and what they're saying today. And it is a fascinating topic. It really is.
Yeah. It's a mystery, and it's something that you want to find out what it is, and you want to see it. And if you ever come to East Texas, holler at me. I'd love to come out with you guys and experience it firsthand.
Yeah, well, be careful what you wish for. But no, I would love. Next time I'm out, I'll next time I head down there, I'll take you out. Like I said, Bob and Tim Sermons and Mo and those guys are the, as far as I'm concerned, some of the top guys in this field. Especially going out with someone calm, cool, level-headed, and that's what those guys are. So next time I'm down there, I'll definitely invite you out with us. But I can't thank you enough for coming on. I've enjoyed talking with you. I really have, Jason.
Sure.
And I thank you for sharing all the stories.
Oh, thank you. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I thought that after my friend had called me and got this stirred up in me again, and I was just so, we've talked several times about it, and I saw your website, and I said, you know what, I'm gonna email this, and it's like you kind of want to talk to somebody about it. So thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it, Wes.
Oh, thanks, man. Interesting night, especially when you have your own encounter to share, and then you have a friend's encounter, and these things are out there. You got to be careful when you're out there. They're definitely out there, especially in East Texas. And I want to give a shout out to all the people out in San Diego that sent me all the nice messages. I apologize for not getting back to you. I was going 110 miles an hour from the time the sun came up till the time the sun went down. I was on the go out there, but I'll be making another trip out there, and I'd love to meet some of the listeners out in that area and just go out and check out some areas with you guys. So thank you again for sending me all the nice messages. And again, if you've had an encounter and you'd like to be on the show, email me. My email address is wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. And if you get a chance, check out the website, sasquatchchronicles.com. Thanks again for listening tonight, everyone. Hope you have a great night. Hope you had a great weekend. And I will see you next time.